Miss Jones, as a nurse and mother, you must have become quite acquainted with children's ailments.
Objection. Your Honor, the witness's specialty is surgery, not pediatrics.
Your Honor, Mrs. Jones had extensive pediatric service during her training.
Overruled. You may respond, Mrs. Jones.
Yes, I do know quite a bit about children's ailments.
Now, you stated that baby James was healthy and happy while he was in your care. Is that right?
Oh, yes, he was. Well, except for the first night. He definitely was not happy the first night that he was with me.
Well, what was the problem?
Mostly he was traumatized by the fire.
Well, why wasn't he taken to the hospital?
Because lying all alone in a hospital ward was definitely not what he needed. And I knew that if special services took him, he might have to spend hours sitting in some office while they looked for a temporary foster home. So I volunteered to take him home with me so that I could give him what I believed he needed, which was a lot of loving one-on-one attention, the same kind that Laura Spencer was giving him before the fire.
Your Honor, I object. The witness was not present at Ward House, and she doesn't know what Laura Spencer actually did before the fire or the murder.
Confine your responses to the questions asked, Mrs. Jones.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mrs. Jones, would you please elaborate on what you meant when you said that baby James was traumatized?
He had a fever, and he was extremely fretful that first night. I remember telling my husband I only got about 20 minutes sleep because baby James was up crying and so miserable most of the night. He needed to be held, and he needed a lot of comforting.
And so what did you attribute this condition?
Fear, disorientation, probably some smoke inhalation. And part of his discomfort could easily have been due to an ear infection, which was taking its course.
Your Honor, I strenuously object. Your Honor, the baby's ear infection has not been established by any medical authority. Therefore, it is the witness's opinion.
Expert opinion. You yourself said that she was a reputable medical professional. You can have the clerk read your words back
That
for
won't
you.
be necessary, Your Honor. The point is, Mrs. Jones had no knowledge at the time that James had any such ailment. She is simply going on what Mrs. Spencer told her after the fact. And it hardly needs mentioning that a defendant on trial for murder possesses a very strong motivation to lie.
Mrs. Jones never said equivocally that the baby had an ear infection, just that the baby might have an ear infection, based on the baby's behavior, his symptoms, and her medical expertise.
I heard enough argument on this subject. I'm going to allow Mrs. Jones to give her impressions of the baby's condition. The jury will weigh the testimony accordingly. I was hoping that during your recent enforced confinement, the two of you might have worked out a less combative mode of communication, but I see that isn't the case. Continue, please. I still have hopes of making it home for dinner.
Well, I'm going to do my best to make your hopes a reality, Your Honor. Mrs. Jones, you've tended to your own children when they've been sick with fever, sore throats, stomach aches, ear infections, the entire gamut. Is that correct?
More times than I can count.
Now, as a nurse, can you estimate the number of times you've seen children with ear infections?
Probably hundreds.
And is it your experience that such maladies can clear up overnight?
Oh, yes, I've seen that happen a lot.
So, in your expert opinion, it's quite possible that James had a residual ear infection the night of the fire and then was fine the next day.
In my opinion, that's entirely possible.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. No further questions, Your Honor.
The witness is excused. You may step down. I'm sure you're all as tired and uncomfortable as I am after a long, hot, powerless day, so I'm going to adjourn court until 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning.
All rise.
Yeah, you were dynamite. Thank you so much.
Hey, you know, I wasn't going to get off of that stand again without telling it like it really was. And I think Justus and I, we're pretty much in sync.
And I have a special hug reserved for you, too. Wow, you look like you're about to burst your bubble. Let's have it.
I think it was a wash. We didn't lose any ground, but We didn't blow her off the playing field by any means.
Yeah, but you've got to remember, the burden of proof is on the prosecution, and every argument of hers that we nullify brings us one step closer to getting Laura free.
Congratulations, Justice, on a very
Excuse me.
skillful
Wait.
cross-examination.
What's the matter with you, Edward? You look like you've seen a ghost.
No, Justice. Ghosts can't hurt us. It's the living that can do all the damage.
Tell me what we're in for today. If it's bad news, I'd like to know now. I'm not in the mood for any more surprises.
Well, the prosecution is going to drive a truckload full of circumstantial evidence by the judge.
How much evidence could she possibly have against me?
It doesn't matter, darling. She's going for the cumulative effect. And truth has nothing to do with that process. I think we've all figured that out by now.
She's getting no free rides here. Every time she lobs a loaded question, I will shoot it down in cross-examination.
Here you go.
Just a minute. So, Edward. Did our waterlogged friend resurface?
Miss Bowles, were you at Luke's on the night of March the 14th?
I was.
Will you please tell the court why?
I was interviewing Damian Smith and Bobby Jones for a segment of my television show around Port Charles.
Did you witness an encounter between Laura Spencer and Damian Smith that night?
Yes.
Describe it for the court, please.
Mrs. Spencer and her husband were having a confrontation with Damian Smith that became so agitated, Mrs. Spencer picked up a baseball bat and threatened him with it. Damian Smith, that is.
You say she threatened him. Elaborate on that, please.
Well, she raised the bat over her head like this, like she wanted to hit him.
Your Honor, Miss Bowles' camera crew captured this moment on videotape, and I request permission to screen it for the jury.
Your Honor, I renew my objection to the showing of this tape. This incident has absolutely nothing to do with the crime with which Mrs. Spencer is accused.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ward, but we've already been over this in chambers. I'm going to allow the tape to be screened, and your objection is overruled. Run your tape, Counselor.
Thank you.
Get out of my place right now.
And you know what? If you were half the mother that you pretend to be, I would think I would at least know what my child was up to.
Easy, gumdrop, easy. For the pleasure of bashing in his head. Remember, Lulu's gonna have to visit you in the slammer until junior prom time.
For the record, would you please state your name?
Dr. Molly Chen.
Dr. Chen, what is your field of expertise?
I'm a forensics expert for the PCPD.
And how long have you worked in this capacity?
It'll be 8 years in August.
Dr. Chen, would you please examine this bat? Have you ever seen it before?
Yes, I have.
Under what circumstances?
I was asked to analyze it in connection with the Damian Smith murder case.
And is this the same kind of bat as the one we just saw on the monitor?
Yes, it is.
Dr. Chen, could you tell us exactly what you found on the handle of this bat as a result of your testing?
A set of fingerprints.
Only one?
That's correct?
And were you able to discover to whom the fingerprints belong?
Yes.
Whose fingerprints were on the murder weapon that killed Damian Smith?
Laura Spencer's.
Laura Spencer's. Can you tell us anything about the pattern of the fingerprints in terms of the way the bat was held?
According to the pattern, Laura Spencer held the bat in such a way as to strike a blow.
Did you discover anything on the opposite end of the bat? The end that would have made contact with the target?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Blood and hair follicles belonging to Damian Smith. And based on the skull marks, I also concluded Mr. Smith was struck by a person shorter than himself.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. No further questions.
Would you care to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor, I do. Dr. Chen, isn't it possible that the fatal blow from this bat could have been wielded not by Mrs. Spencer, but by someone wearing gloves?
It's possible.
And suppose a tall person, such as myself, swung the bat in this manner. Could that have left the same types of marks found on Damien Smith's skull?
Yes, I suppose it would.
Thank you.
For the record, please state your name.
Cora White.
What is your occupation, Miss White?
Oh, I'm a child caregiver at the Bradley Ward House. At least, I was until the fire.
As an employee of Ward House, did you ever see this bat on the premises at any time?
Yes, I did.
Do you know how this bat made its way to Ward House?
Oh, Laura Spencer brought it over, along with other sporting equipment for the children.
Do you remember when?
The morning of the fire.
When you first saw the bat, was it covered in plastic?
Oh, several pieces of the equipment were covered. I wanted to help Laura take the plastic off, but I didn't have time. We were leaving for Rochester, and the van was waiting.
Did you actually see Ms. Spencer remove the plastic?
No.
So when you went to Rochester, the bat was in pristine condition and its covering still intact?
Yes, it was.
Miss White, are you familiar with a Ward House baby named James?
Oh, very much so. I've taken a lot of care of him since he joined us.
Why didn't James make the trip to Rochester?
Oh, he'd been very fussy the day before. He cried a lot, and he was rubbing his ear. Laura thought he was probably coming down with the same ear infection Leslie Lou had. I agreed that was probably the case, so that's why I left James home with Laura.
Thank you, Miss White. No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Jensen, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Miss White, do you have a medical degree?
No, of course not. But I do know babies.
Do you have any medical training that would qualify you to make a diagnosis?
No.
One more question. Did you offer to stay behind in order to take care of little James?
Yes.
And why didn't you? Miss White?
Because Laura insisted I go to Rochester. She knew how much the trip meant
A
to
simple
me.
yes or no will suffice. Did Laura Spencer insist that you go to Rochester while she stayed behind with a so-called sick baby?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
At this time, I'd like to adjourn for a lunch recess. Court will reconvene in 1 hour.
All rise.
Laura, I'm so sorry.
There's no need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong.
Skillfully done, Counselor.
Not skillfully enough.
Didn't I tell you that Tommy was glued to the TV set last night when you were on the news? I think he is developing a serious case of hero worship.
Fickle child that he is.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Fine.
Luke, you know that guy you wanted me to pull the rap sheet on? Harper. Yeah, what about him? His body just washed up east of the Port Charles Harbor.